At my birthday dinner, my son said, "Be quiet, Mom. No one is interested." I simply got up from the table and walked out. After that, I ceased paying their mortgages, liquidated my assets, and went abroad. The following morning, I had 84 missed calls. My name is Joan Patterson. I'm a widow, a retired nurse, and a mother who used to think that love was defined by sacrifice. My apartment is silent, save for the gentle ticking of the clock and the refrigerator's low hum. The air carries the scent of lavender, which mingles with the faint, musty smell of old documents. In my lap, I'm holding a worn wedding photo of David and me, poised in front of our very first home, our smiles radiating a belief that we owned the world. I run my thumb over his face, recalling the sheer vitality in his expression that day. It's been almost 3 decades since his heart gave out unexpectedly. I can still recall the sound of the doctor's words, and the profound silence that fell over the house that night. Once everyone was gone, I shut myself in the bathroom. The reflection that stared back wasn't a woman I knew. Her eyes were swollen and red, her frame shaking. I was suddenly a widow, alone with a 10-year-old son who was now fatherless. Gripping the sides of the sink, I made a quiet promise: my boy will have all the chances we were denied. He will never experience hardship. I will guarantee it. That single vow became the driving force of my existence. After that, my life became a ceaseless blur of activity. Over at Christ Hospital, I took on so many double shifts that profound fatigue became my normal state. My feet would throb and swell within my worn-out nursing shoes. My back protested with a constant, deep ache. My dinner was frequently just a can of soup in the staff room, swallowed down quickly before the next call lights started flashing. When my colleagues invited me out for a drink, I'd politely decline, claiming I was just too exhausted. The reality was much more basic. I didn't have the money for it. Every single dollar had a designation. My old Honda clattered along the same routes for 2 decades. I stitched up my own uniforms, dressed in clean but long out-of-style clothing, and clipped coupons with religious dedication. The modest savings account I'd labeled Sterling's Future Fund was my anchor. It contained more than currency. It contained my purpose. Each deposit I made was a vow honored to the reflection I'd seen crying in the mirror. There were times the quiet in the apartment felt oppressive, like a physical weight. But I never felt bitter. I discovered a sense of tranquility in my mission. When Sterling would bring home a report card covered in grades, I'd fasten it above the kitchen sink, my smile shining through tears of pride. His accomplishments were my compensation. His joy was my income. I vividly recall the evening he announced he wanted to attend a college in another state. I agreed, masking the sheer panic I felt about the cost. Once he was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my calculator and a tepid cup of tea, manipulating the figures until what seemed unattainable looked almost feasible. Others commented that I sacrificed too much. Perhaps that's true. Yet, when your love is profound, sacrifice doesn't register as a loss. It's just essential, like breathing. On quiet evenings, I survey my small apartment and puzzle over where the time has gone. I constructed my son's future piece by piece, trusting that such love would be reciprocated. But love doesn't always find its way back. And occasionally, the very walls you erect out of devotion are the ones that eventually exclude you. The day Sterling's acceptance from NYU came, I observed him ripping the envelope open right at our kitchen table. His hands were trembling, his eyes wide with astonishment. I was accepted. "Mom," he breathed, his voice cracking. I drew him into an embrace, and for the first time in a long, long time, I wept from sheer happiness. That evening, long after he'd gone out to celebrate, I remained by myself with my calculator and a pile of invoices. Tuition, room and board, textbooks. The total was more than my annual salary. I didn't even pause. I liquidated my savings, secured a personal loan, and put my name down for every overtime shift at the hospital. My body throbbed with exhaustion, but my spirit was overflowing. Each double shift, every hazy dawn, every meal I ate standing up, it all felt like progress toward his future. For years on, I was at his graduation, one small woman in a sea of hundreds. When his name was announced, I watched him raise his arms victoriously. My heart felt fit to burst with pride. I applauded until my hands stung, tears streaming down my face. He couldn't spot me in the crowd, but it made no difference. I had fulfilled my vow. Then Isla entered the picture. The first time we met, she breezed into my apartment, her high heels clicking and her perfume overwhelming the small space. She was civil but reserved, her gaze sweeping dismissively over my modest furnishings. Sterling, however, looked at her just as I had once looked at David, as if she was the center of his universe. After they got engaged, she detailed her vision for the wedding: a riverside country club, masses of white roses, a professional band. I just nodded, my mind already crunching numbers I knew I couldn't handle. Sterling stopped by one night, unable to meet my gaze. "Mom, we're just a bit shy on the funds," he said quietly. I knew what he meant. I dipped into my retirement savings and wrote them the check. I rationalized it as an act of love. During the reception, Isla was luminous beneath the crystal chandeliers as Sterling twirled her around the dance floor. The music was lovely, the attendees all looked splendid. I observed from the periphery of the crowd, clutching a glass of champagne, my smile stretched thin over my fatigue. This, I assured myself, is what joy looks like. Several months passed, and they decided to purchase a house, a place they deemed perfect for a family. Isla specified, Hyde Park. 2 floors, a large yard, marble countertops. I cautioned them about the expense, but Sterling dismissed my concerns. "It's an investment, Mom. We'll be fine." When the lender balked, I used the remainder of David's life insurance for their down payment and also co-signed on the mortgage. Sterling grasped my hand firmly. "You've always had faith in me," he told me. I smiled back, though my signature on that document felt more burdensome than any double shift I'd ever pulled. The house was magnificent. Gleaming floors, vaulted ceilings, and light pouring in through massive windows. Yet, each time I went over, I felt like an intruder. Isla would greet me with a flawless smile that never quite touched her eyes. Nevertheless, I continued my Sunday visits, always bringing a homemade pie. It became my routine, my anchor. I'd get there early, assist with setting the table, and recount stories to Leo and Chloe about their grandfather, like the time he dropped a birthday cake and laughed so hard he wept. They used to giggle freely. As time went on, they started glancing at their mother for approval before laughing. I acted as if I didn't see it. Those dinners were what sustained me. They were my evidence that I had a place, that every sacrifice and all those sleepless nights had counted for something. I was oblivious to the fissures developing just under that perfect veneer. At that time, I was just a mother, proud of her son. A woman who had sacrificed everything in the name of love, blind to the fact that the life I had constructed for him would eventually reject me. The shift was so gradual I barely perceived it. The change was subtle, like the sound of wood stressing just before it splits. One Sunday, I began to tell a well-worn story about Sterling's first day of kindergarten, and he emitted a soft sigh. It was quiet, but it was sharp, and it sliced right through the dining room's cozy atmosphere. "Mom," he said, his smile weak. "We already know that one." I tried to laugh it away, acting as if I hadn't detected the irritation in his voice, but the mood in the room had changed. It was faint but undeniable. The role I used to play, providing comfort, now felt like a temporary position. Isla's responses followed. They were quiet, calculated. When I would offer to assist in the kitchen, she'd counter, "Oh, please, Joan. Just relax. You've already done so much." Her smile was always polite, but her voice held a new chill I couldn't quite place. Initially, I convinced myself I was just being sensitive, but her little jokes soon became a regular occurrence, small, sharp barbs disguised as charm. "You're just adorable," she remarked one evening when I attempted to share my old pot roast recipe. "So wonderfully old-fashioned with your cooking. We all use air fryers now, Joan, not slow cookers." Sterling let out a small laugh, not from malice, but from routine. I forced a smile as well, though the comments stung. The rejection started to become more overt. In the middle of conversations, Isla would start checking her phone or share a specific look with Sterling right when I was speaking. If I offered any advice, she would tilt her head and reply, "Oh, how interesting." She said it in that particular way people use when they really mean, "How irrelevant." I kept telling myself it was just stress. Young couples face pressures that were foreign to me. That I insisted to myself that she wasn't trying to be hurtful, that she was just weary, and that he was merely preoccupied. But denial has a tendency to normalize suffering. One Sunday, I opted to bring something unique, a family photo album I had treasured for decades. Its cover was frayed and the pages were yellow with age, but the pictures held inside were fragments of our shared history. There was David holding Sterling as a baby at the zoo. Sterling on his first bicycle. Our old home covered in snow. A picture of me in my nursing scrubs, smiling despite my obvious fatigue. I desperately wanted Leo and Chloe to understand their roots, to see the people and the events that had formed us. Following the meal, I set the album carefully on the coffee table. "I was thinking," I said, "that we might enjoy looking at some of these tonight." "Oh, Joan, really not right now," Isla replied, her tone airy but absolute. "No one wants to pore over those dusty old relics. They're just making the coffee table look messy." Messy. The word struck me physically, like a slap. I went rigid, my hands still on the album's worn leather cover. Sterling looked uncomfortable for a second, then he looked at Isla, and finally back to me. "Perhaps later, Mom," he said quietly. His gaze darted away before I could hold it. I nodded, manufacturing a smile as I pulled the album from the table back onto my lap. "Of course," I murmured. Later. Nearby, Leo and Chloe were huddled together, giggling at something on their electronic devices. I sat there in silence, turning the pages by myself, my fingers shaking just a little. Each photo, once a source of warmth, now felt like evidence of a profound loss. In the weeks that came after, the atmosphere grew heavier. The children, unaware, started to mimic their parents' attitudes. "We already know this story, Grandma," Chloe interrupted, as I started to recount a memory of her father as a child. Leo snickered, chiming in, "Yeah, we've heard it." Their laughter wasn't malicious, it was innocent, but it wounded me deeply. I attempted to join in their laughter. "You are quite right," I said gently. "Your grandma is getting forgetful." Later at night, I would analyze these moments over and over, the sigh, the shared smirks, the constant cutting me off. I tried to convince myself I was being overly sensitive, that all families experience these stages. "They're just exhausted. Sterling is facing a lot of pressure at work," I'd whisper to myself, washing a plate that was already clean. "They don't intend to be unkind." But under the surface of my denial, a change was starting within me. A quiet, cold awareness was setting in, a truth that was too agonizing to articulate. I was becoming unseen in the very house I had helped them acquire. I was a phantom at their dinner table. One night, as I was leaving after dinner, I looked back through their large front window just before I got into my car. I could see Isla laughing as she cleared dishes, while Sterling refilled her wine glass. The photo album was still on the bookshelf where I'd placed it, completely undisturbed. I remained there for a long time, just observing the reflections on the glass, before I finally turned and left. I did not cry that evening. The tears wouldn't come. But as I sat in my car, hands folded in my lap, gazing into the dark street, I sensed a part of me starting to calcify. It was a small, quiet, but definite feeling. It was the sound of the initial fissure. The house was immaculate for my birthday dinner. The floors were polished, soft music was playing. Candlelight danced over a table set flawlessly. The aroma of roast chicken and rosemary filled the room, warm and rich. I had personally baked 2 pies that morning, despite Isla's insistence that the caterers were managing the dessert. "It's tradition," I had replied. She offered a weak smile. "Whatever makes you happy, Joan." Now, I was seated at the extreme end of the long dining table, enveloped in laughter that felt distant. Isla, looking sophisticated in a burgundy silk dress, refilled Sterling's wine glass. The children were speaking courteously, their voices subdued and measured. The entire scene was one of perfection. And yet, I felt like a piece of decoration, positioned for appearance rather than for any real purpose. I maintained a fixed smile, concentrating on the small details, the sound of cutlery, the smell of cinnamon, the low buzz of the discussion. This is family, I told myself. This is what success is. This is the result of all my work. Isla eventually lifted her glass, proposing a toast to home, to health, and to everything we have built. Glasses chimed around the table. Sterling's arm brushed against hers fondly as he murmured something that drew a laugh from her. I stared down at my dinner plate, reflecting on the decades I had dedicated to enabling this very moment. The loans, the overtime, the depleted retirement fund, all of it for him. The dinner conversation shifted to vacations and career advancements. I contributed to the conversation when I found an opening, always cautious not to interrupt. Eventually, a brief silence fell, the type of pause that seems to beckon memories. I smiled, a wave of nostalgia washing over me. You know, I started, my voice quiet, your grandfather and I had our very first celebratory dinner with just a small roasted chicken. We didn't have the money for anything grander that year, I chuckled softly at the memory. He scorched it black, and we wound up eating instant mashed potatoes right out of the pot, laughing about it all evening. Be quiet, Mom. The words were spoken softly, but they were as sharp and cold as ice. I went rigid. Sterling didn't even raise his head from his dinner. It's just so tedious, he stated, his voice completely level. No one is interested. The entire room fell into an abrupt, heavy silence. Isla allowed a small, knowing smirk to play on her lips, concealing it behind a sip of her wine. The children just gazed down at their laps, their eyes large and their faces red. For a second, I felt as though I couldn't draw a breath. My hand was shaking as I placed my silverware on the plate. The clink of the metal against the china sounded unnaturally loud. I kept waiting, expecting him to grasp what he had just said, for his expression to show some regret. But nothing of the sort occurred. He simply continued cutting his chicken as though the conversation hadn't stopped. Isla eventually glanced up. Oh, Sterling, she chimed in, you're just awful. Her laugh was frail and practiced, which only intensified the sting. A wave of humiliation washed over me, hot as a flame. My chest constricted, and my throat felt parched. I attempted to say something, but my voice wouldn't work. I stared at my son, my only child, and what I saw wasn't malice, but pure indifference. That pained me more deeply than any overt anger could have. The silence dragged on, filled only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Even the children remained perfectly still. I managed a tight, small smile and carefully folded my linen napkin. Despite my trembling hands, I whispered, "Please excuse me," as I slowly pushed my chair back. I just need a moment outside. Nobody tried to stop me as I walked down the hall. The conversation and laughter resumed, quietly at first, then growing in volume, as if I had never been interrupted. I paused at the front door, my hand clutching my coat, just listening. My heart was beating so fiercely I could feel it in my ears. The moment I stepped outside, the chilly air struck my face. I descended the porch stairs, my shoes making a distinct sound on the stone walkway. The illumination from the house shone behind me, warm and inviting, representing a world where I was no longer welcome. I got to my car but didn't turn the key. I just sat, gazing out the front window, observing my breath turn to mist on the cold glass. My own reflection looked back at me, weary eyes, a tense mouth. A woman who had just been ejected from the very table she had funded. The moment seemed to last an eternity. The quiet was no longer comforting, it was oppressive. I reflected on the vow I'd made to David so many years prior, that our son would have every chance, every advantage. I had honored that promise. I had sacrificed everything. But sitting there in the chilled darkness, a terrible realization dawned on me. This wasn't just an awkward incident. It was a clarification. To my son, I was no longer a person. I was static, a nuisance, an obligation to be handled. The sounds of merriment from the house intensified, muffled by the windows, and I knew with certainty I could not return. Not this evening. Perhaps never again. I started the car, my hands still shaking, and pulled away from the curb. The streetlights reflected on the cold pavement, and with every mile that passed, the crushing pressure in my chest began to lessen, just slightly. I did not weep. I felt I had no tears remaining. But I was certain that something fundamental had fractured, something profound and permanent. That evening, the woman whose identity was defined by love and self-denial simply vanished. In her absence, something different emerged. A quiet resolve, more acute than any insult my son had delivered. I informed them I was feeling unwell. My voice was steady. It was composed, almost courteous. Isla glanced up for a second, her smile strained. Of course, Joan. I hope you feel better. Sterling didn't even look over. Right, Mom. Drive carefully. That was all. No hint of worry, no kindness. Just the sound of silverware on china as I quietly excused myself. The atmosphere outdoors was frigid and biting. I paused on the porch, inhaling the cold air, looking back at the brightly lit house. The house I had subsidized, now filled with a celebration that excluded me. I moved down the walkway, my steps quiet on the stone. I did not go home. Instead, I drove just down the street and parked under a bare-branched tree, where I could still observe the house. From that distance, it looked idyllic, like a postcard of domestic bliss. I could see the shapes of people moving inside, hear the faint sounds of laughter. My entire family, the focus of my life's work, the recipient of all my sacrifices. And I was sitting alone in the cold, invisible. The tears started quietly, then they came uncontrollably until I couldn't contain them. My hands clenched the steering wheel as deep sobs shook my entire body. Decades of fatigue, sacrifice, and quiet grief poured out of me in the darkness. I had given them absolutely everything, every extra shift, every cent I earned, every part of my being, to construct that home and that life. And in the end, I was less than an afterthought at their dinner party. Once the weeping subsided, I sat there, my eyes puffy and my breathing ragged. The house shone in the distance like a beacon, but it held no warmth for me. In that instant, I finally comprehended. My sacrifices were never interpreted as acts of love. They were merely accepted as my obligation. My nurturing had become expected. My devotion was unseen. I wasn't cherished for who I was valued for what I supplied. This understanding left me feeling completely empty. Yet, within that void, a new feeling started to take shape. The pain solidified, cooled, and honed itself into a sharp, resilient resolve. I whispered one word into the darkness: enough. When I got back to my own apartment, I knew exactly what my next steps were. I switched on the kitchen light, and its familiar, soft light filled the room. It was silent, the same profound quiet I had once dreaded. But tonight, it gave me strength. I went to my closet, retrieved an old metal lockbox, and its hinges complained as I lifted the lid. Contained within were the paper trails of decades of my duty, folders, legal forms, payment records. I laid them out on my kitchen table, item by item. The mortgage document, with my name clearly listed next to Sterling's. The title for Isla's luxury SUV, which was legally in my name. The statements for the joint emergency fund, showing every single deposit made by me. For all these years, I had meticulously organized these papers, viewing them as simple records. Tonight, they were transformed. They were evidence. They were leverage. I traced my fingers over the documents, my heartbeat even. He sees me as old and feeble, I murmured to myself. He confused my kindness with weakness. I felt the power of those words anchor itself deep within me. He has forgotten who I am. The refrigerator's low hum was the only sound, along with the clock ticking on the wall. My tears were long gone, replaced by a strange sense of peace. I collected the documents into a precise pile, straightening the edges as if preparing a briefing. They had, in essence, told me to be quiet and disappear. But my silence was no longer about submission. It was about tactics. And by the end of that night, I had a complete plan. The morning after my birthday dinner, I was awake before the sun. The apartment was quiet, the sky outside a pale, flat gray. I sat on the edge of my bed for a minute, taking in the familiar hum of the fridge and the faraway sound of a train. My heart felt steady. My thoughts were lucid. I had spent my entire life responding to the needs of others. Now, it was my turn to initiate. I retrieved a small suitcase from the closet and opened it on my bed. I wouldn't require much, just some clothes, my nursing credentials, the wedding photo of David, and the metal box containing my papers. That was everything. Everything else, the furniture, the bedding, the quiet artifacts of my former existence, could be left. I had borne their weight for long enough. After I had finished packing, I surveyed the apartment one final time. The photos on the wall, the kitchen clock, the drooping flowers in a vase. They all seemed like relics from a life that wasn't mine anymore. That I left no note. There was nothing more to say. I started my car just as the first sliver of dawn appeared. The city was deserted, the air crisp. As I headed south, the miles passed by, feeling like I was shedding an old skin. Ohio disappeared, replaced by Kentucky, then Tennessee, and eventually Georgia. The climate became milder, the air softer, tinged with the smell of pine and the sea. I paused only for fuel and coffee, never once considering turning back. When I finally arrived in Florida, the sun was a low, golden orb over the ocean. I located a modest apartment in St. Augustine, a bright, clean unit with white walls and a small balcony overlooking the water. The property manager, an elderly woman with a gentle expression, gave me the keys without pressing for details. That evening, I stood shoeless on the cool tiles of the balcony, observing the waves crash under the moon. The ocean sound was a steady, soft roar, and I felt a tension deep inside me finally release, for the first time in decades. The following morning, I made coffee and took it out to the balcony. The ocean breeze played with my hair, and I took a deep, cleansing breath. It was time to begin. I picked up my phone and started making calls. Each one was methodical, quiet, and decisive. My first call was to my attorney back in Cincinnati. "Good morning, Susan," I said when she picked up. My voice was firm. "I need to make changes to my will." She paused. "Of course, Joan. What did you have in mind?" "I'm establishing a new fund," I stated. "The David Patterson Nursing Scholarship. It's to help cover tuition for nursing students. My entire estate is to go to that fund." "And Sterling?" she asked cautiously. "He is to be explicitly disinherited," I replied. "I want no possibility of it being contested." There was a brief pause on the line before she replied, "Understood. I will draft the documents immediately." My next call was to my financial planner. "I need to liquidate the joint emergency account," I instructed. "Please transfer the entire balance into a new, individual account solely in my name." He sounded taken aback. "Joan, are you certain? That account?" "I am certain," I interrupted. "It was always my money. I simply allowed someone else to believe they had a claim to it." After that was settled, I moved on to the final calls. "I'm calling about the mortgage for the property in Hyde Park," I told the bank agent. "I am formally removing myself as co-signer, effective immediately." Her professional tone changed. "Mrs. Patterson, that action will trigger a refinancing requirement for the primary borrower." "I am fully aware of that," I said. "Please issue the notice today." I could vividly picture Sterling's expression upon receiving that letter, the bewilderment, the rising panic, and the sudden understanding that his financial buffer had just vanished. My last call was to the auto insurance provider. "The Lexus SUV registered in my name," I stated. "I need to report it for repossession. It is no longer in my possession, and its use is no longer authorized by me." When I finished the last call, I placed the phone on the table and let out a long breath. The sun was higher in the sky now, its light fracturing on the ocean's surface like broken glass. Seagulls cried out, riding the wind. My coffee was now cold, but it didn't bother me. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, every choice, every action, every word was entirely my own. I shut my eyes, feeling the breeze wash over me. The silence that had once been my prison was now my strength. I had said enough. From now on, my silence would speak for me. The phone calls began 3 days later. It started with 1 or 2, but soon it was a deluge, until my phone's screen was a constant barrage of notifications. 84 missed calls by the time the week was over. I didn't pick up a single time. Instead, I allowed the voicemails to accumulate, checking them once daily, much like one might check a weather report to gauge the severity of an approaching storm. The initial messages were almost nonchalant. "Mom? Where have you gone?" Sterling's voice was impatient but controlled. "This has stopped being funny. Phone me." I imagined him at that polished kitchen island, drumming his fingers on the marble, fully expecting me to relent as I always had. I gave a small, faint smile and erased the message. By day 2, the tone had changed dramatically. Isla's voice was shaking. "Joan, a tow truck they just took my car. They claimed it was registered to you. I have no idea what is going on. Please, Joan, just call us back, please." Her desperation was palpable in every syllable. I recognized that sound well. Consequences don't always arrive with a bang, sometimes they just sound desperate. By the 5th message, Sterling's self-control had shattered. "Mom," he yelled, his voice cracking with fury. "The bank just called. They informed us you're removing yourself from the mortgage and we have 30 days to secure new financing. What in the hell do you think you're doing? You cannot do this. This is our children's home. You are ruining this family. Ruining this family." The sheer irony of that statement made me chuckle quietly. Families aren't destroyed in an instant. They wear away, slowly. Bit by bit, until a single cruel phrase at a dinner table finally completes the damage that years of disregard had started. I remained on my balcony, the Florida sun reflecting off the ocean, and erased every single message. My silence was the only reply they would get. In the following days, I eased into my new routine. It consisted of coffee, sea air, and a gentle sense of purpose. Doing volunteer work at a local clinic felt like returning to myself. For the first time in decades, my hands felt steady, their movements guided by peace, not obligation. Occasionally, after my shift, I would walk barefoot on the beach, allowing the cool water to rush over my ankles. The world seemed fresh, clearer, and gentler. I found I wasn't thinking about the house in Hyde Park or the individuals who lived there. I was just thinking about the act of breathing, and how novel it felt to do it without a weight on my chest. One morning, I was standing on the balcony with my coffee, the sun warming my face. The ocean glittered in front of me, immense and vibrant. I was no longer just a mother or a widow. I was, simply, Joan. My son wanted me to be quiet, I whispered to the breeze. He finally got what he wanted. My silence had cost him everything he had assumed was his by right, and in doing so, it had returned my own life to me. The waves rushed to the shore, as if in reply. And for the first time, in a very long time, silence felt like peace. Joan Patterson's path was one of profound heartache, quiet bravery, and eventual redemption. After decades of self-denial and being overlooked, she ultimately took back her own dignity and tranquility, demonstrating that true strength doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes, it is a quiet, firm decision. Her story is a reminder that our self-worth is never truly gone, it is only sometimes misplaced. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. We encourage you to leave a comment below to share your thoughts or perhaps a personal story of your own. Please visit our page to discover more moving and powerful narratives just like this one.